Joan has worked with troubled teens for more than 20 years. She founded Project Pooch in 1993 while she was vice principal of William P. Lord High School at McLaren Youth Correctional Facility in Woodburn, Oregon. An animal lover herself since childhood, she recognized the rehabilitative importance of the human-animal bond and the transformative power of the unconditional love dogs offer for juvenile offenders. Starting with one dog and one youth, Joan built a program where youths learned to manage their own behavior as they learned to manage the behavior of their dogs. The program proved so successful and popular that Joan left teaching and has committed herself full-time to the development and continuation of the program. Joan received her BA in Education from Washington State University and her MST from Portland State University. Another hero for dogs and for kids. Joan?
We want to give you a visual of the juvenile correctional facility in Woodburn. And this is the only program for juveniles in the United States where we actually have a kennel on site. And the youth are carefully selected to get into the program. They cannot have any animal abuse in their background. And what we're trying to do is be proactive and prevent some of what you just saw. Now, we do not allow certain breeds, but it's for different reasons. When I first started the program, I wanted to choose a youth who would be successful. And it was a youth who was incarcerated because I thought someone had killed his pit bull and therefore he would have a lot of compassion for animals. So I actually went to his unit to give him some grief counseling, but I discovered that I was wrong. He had been incarcerated because he shot and killed a person who had shot his pit bull, but the pit bull lived. So we started with this one youth who's now 30 years old and has not returned to any kind of criminal background, and he's held a steady job for all this time. So the breeds that we do not allow, because he was in a gang, pit bulls, Rottweilers, and Dobermans, purebred. And that's because of the gang affiliation. One of the big problems that we have in corrections is gangs. And if I let a Project Pooch youth run around with a pit bull, that's a status symbol to him. And then the correctional facility just added German Shepherds. And most of our dogs are mixed breeds. So what you will see in this video, you will definitely recognize it's a mix with pit and probably lab. So I'd like to first give you a visual to kind of let you see some positive going on in changing attitudes of young people who many times come from families where they don't really take good care of dogs nor care for them. As I said, most of the dogs that we bring into the program are mixed breed. And we get all of our dogs from shelters. We do not take them from private parties because we're trying to teach these young men responsibility. That if you get a pet, it's for the life of the pet. It's not just for a while and then you give it up. And we take the dogs from the shelters that are most difficult for the shelters to place. There'll be big dogs. There'll be dogs that were cute little puppies, but no one trained them. They maybe have some other issues like food aggression, don't always like other dogs. Some dogs don't get along with cats. Some dogs wouldn't be really good with children. So in our selection, I temperament test, but you can't always tell everything when you temperament test a dog in a shelter. because, as we say, there's the 2-week honeymoon period. And I always say they're so glad I came along to bail them out that they're on their best behavior many times. But we do temperament test, and we do not euthanize any dogs. Now, we've come very close to having to get a dog out of the facility. The problem with operating a nonprofit such as Project Pooch at a correctional facility is the correctional facility is a state entity with deep pockets, and they're always concerned about lawsuits. So some things I can control and some things I can't. And some things change over time with superintendents. And at this point in the program, I even offer grooming and boarding to help us raise money for the program. But now the Oregon Youth Authority is saying, well, we don't think you should be doing grooming and boarding because it's a conflict of interest. And coming from the education standpoint, I'm trying to give youth more job skills other than just taking care of the dogs and learning dog training, but to also give them some skills that when they leave, they can go out and get a job. So that's one of my present battles right now. So the Oregon Youth Authority has a memorandum of understanding with our nonprofit, Project Pooch, and we review that every year. They pretty much left us alone for 13 years until we got a $20,000 grant to build heated kennels for the dogs. And the whole idea was to help the older dogs that we get from shelters, and also to teach the youth some building skills and kennel management. And it's not just dogs in a kennel, but how do you keep the kennel clean? How do you keep it in good condition? So that they could also have job skills in the construction arena. And the previous superintendent promised they would take care of the electrical for the heated floors and the water, et cetera. And then a new superintendent came along and said the state is not paying for that. So then we had to go out and raise money to be able to provide that. So with our $20,000 grant, it took us a year, but we got construction workers who wanted to work with youth. And many of our youth, probably most of them, come from families where they didn't get parenting, they didn't get guidance. So for them to have construction workers come and help them learn some building skills. We have groomers who come in, we have trainers, we have purebred dog folks come in and tell us about the different breeds, because we're trying to teach these young men responsibility, patience, and compassion for all life. And we're just doing it through working with dogs. One of the most memorable events was a TV station from Seattle came to do a story called Breaking the Bond. And they interviewed this youth who was going to be giving his dog to this new family. The dog had passed the basic obedience, not your dog show obedience, but just basic sit, stay, down, off, that sort of thing. And the canine good citizen. He said, "Are you going to cry?" "No, I'm not going to cry." "Are you going to stomp off and get mad?" "No, I'm not going to do that." So we're all standing there having this big event of the dog being adopted. The adults start crying. The kid starts crying. And this other youth in the program went over to this youth who just gave up his dog. He slapped him on the back and he said, "Just think of it this way, man. You saved a life." And you know, these kids have done things that they have to be incarcerated. But if they can give back by rehabilitating these dogs, who most of them that we get are on death row, either a volunteer at the shelter is afraid of them, or they're just big 83-pound labs that people have a difficult time handling. So we have space for 13 dogs, and they're kept in kennels to keep them safe, because as you'll see in the video, they live in dormitory style, and I couldn't risk a dog going back to a unit and having a youth
And now,
who's
an
abused.
Animal Planet Showcase
Abuse the dog.
presentation.
Gives you a second chance.
Find out on Cell Dogs.
I'm in here for robbery in the first degree. I'm gonna be here for 7.5 years. I've already done 4 years.
Nicholas is serving time at Oregon's McLaren Youth Correctional Facility, one of the largest and oldest reformatories in the United States. Founded 111 years ago, it is home to 400 youth offenders.
Everyone here will be released to the community at some point in time, and it's our jobs to provide them the opportunity to gain the skills to get their lives under control and not be a burden on society.
Which means that one day, Nicholas will be free again.
The bottom line for us is to provide the community with some level of public safety even after these youth leave this facility.
At McLaren, Project Pooch is one form of rehabilitation that's been successful, matching high-risk young men with high-risk dogs. That is, dogs at risk of being put to sleep. The idea is together, they can save each other's lives by changing bad behavior.
There's something about that relationship and caring for an animal and having that responsibility that seems to assist these young men in kind of getting a grasp on their own lives.
As Nicholas's treatment manager, Tim Vanderstein thought Project Pooch could help Nicholas with some of his problems.
He had a pretty tough guy image, and Nick has had a hard time to get beyond that, because that was his lifestyle. That's what he lived. He had to be tough.
To become a better dog trainer, Nicholas had to do something he was not accustomed to. He had to show outward praise and affection.
When I first started, it was just like, oh, good dog, and then just turn around and walk away. And, but you know, you get more into it. Good girl. Good girl.
And so, working with Pooches in the program, actually have seen Nick soften quite a bit. One of the key things they do is they praise the dog. They're excited, they praise them out loud. And a lot of the guys, and Nick had some problems with that, because that tough guy image, it's hard to say, oh, good Pooch, great dog, blah, 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 in front of all the guys around, because they're tough guys.
Nicholas needed that softer side when he met an energetic dog named Chloe.
You learn how to have your patience and work with them. You know, you learn that you learn something about yourself. You learn, if you set your mind to it, you can train the dog and they'll listen to you as well. So she missed me?
She did. She heard you whistle this morning when I was walking her from the cottage. And she knew it was your whistle.
All of Nicholas's hard work paid off. Chloe was adopted by his treatment manager, Tim.
I think when Nick saw Chloe, he thought maybe it'd be a good dog for us and brought her over to the cottage. She was a really good-natured, easygoing dog, real friendly, and picked up to Nick's training right off the bat.
Really smart, intelligent dog right here.
She's a quick learner.
Tim occasionally brings Chloe back for more training with Nicholas, but she doesn't get to stay with him for long.
I miss this dog. I miss it a lot. But man, picked up on it real quick, and I'm like, you know, that's good because of Lee. I know that she got a good home.
Unlike the adult prison programs, Project Pooch houses its dogs in kennels.
They start licking your hand saying, "Uncle."
While Nicholas, a gang member for most of his life, lives in Smith Cottage with 25 other youth offenders.
This is the Smith Cottage unit. This is where I live. This is our dorm area. This is where me and a lot of other peers sleep. This is our bathroom. It's kind of messy, but you know, we try.
We have a mixture of all guys. We have guys from all kinds of different gangs, Crips, Bloods, the different groups. We actually house them together so that we can teach them to live together and accept each other. That's part of our treatment that we do.
Ronnie is another tough guy who could benefit from Project Pooch. But first, he had to get over a very bad experience.
I was scared because the dog bit me when I was little. Jumped over a fence and bit me. So I was pretty scared about that. And come here and I see dogs, I was like, man, I thought I was going to get bit. Well, I talked to the director of Pooch, Miss Dalton, and she knew my problem because guys around council would tell her that I'm afraid of dogs.
Under the supervision of Project founder and director Joan Dalton, Ronnie began to work out his fear of dogs, one pet at a time.
Yeah, I was scared, but they told me that she's alright and it wouldn't bite me, so I started petting it and then I started feeding it, and finally I just got used to it.
Then he met Calvin, a dog Ronnie had a lot in common with.
He's fairly new. He's 18 months old, so he's still a puppy, so he still got a lot of learning to do, but he came from a family.
Okay, the word is it may just be having problems, so I can just continue on. You always have a backup plan, right? I have to tell you about that little dachshund. That dachshund actually belongs to our pro bono attorney for Project Pooch. So I figured that was pretty safe since it probably wouldn't bite. And the attorney used to bring the dog to us because the attorney's son was incarcerated at McLaren. And the son's mother died, and the son was locked up. And it was the youth in Project Pooch who said, why don't we take the dog over to the living unit and see if the dog will help the son get through some of the grief over his mother's death. So we took the dog over there, and I came back at the end of the day to pick up the dog, and the dog and the youth had fallen asleep on the bed all afternoon. But if you ask the youth in Project Pooch, how do you develop compassion, they probably won't tell you, but I observe it. So a lot of the compassion is observation. And we also have a cat that lives in the lobby. The best cat ever for visiting kids, and many times when the youth come to the lobby where the cat sleeps, they'll just pick up the cat and pet the cat. And some of the youth will say, you know, these animals give us love that many of us never experienced in our life. And so many of them can express themselves with this dog of theirs, or to see them laugh because the dog brought the ball back, or the dog did something silly on the agility course. So I see a lot of the compassion and the responsibility. When I first started the program, we had a lot of dog leashes being chewed. And I said, you know, this is really expensive. And so I said, okay, the next leash that gets chewed, that handler is going to have to use a rope as a leash. And that means walking around campus, because we walk our dogs around campus a lot. I never had a chewed up leash since, ever. So a lot of times they were never held accountable. Parents kind of gave up on them, they couldn't control them. So the kids get into bad stuff like we just heard about of the pit bull cases and things, other things that they shouldn't be involved in. Dog bites, since we're talking a lot about dog bites, I've learned a lot in the 13 years since I started this program. And one of the things that I've learned is there's a natural instinct on the part of a parent if their child is going to be bit or another child's going to hit them. They intervene and they protect the child. I've found the same thing with youth and their dogs. And no matter how many times we say, if the dogs get in a fight, you know, they're supposed to have the hose ready. But sometimes what kicks in is the youth goes to separate the dogs, and then he ends up with a dog bite. What happened at about 3-4 years ago, someone didn't latch the kennel, and one of the dogs pushed it open and saw another dog playing in the yard and attacked the other dog. And there was one youth in the yard, and we couldn't hear the youth yelling for help because we were inside the kennel and they were playing music. Pretty soon there's this on the door, and I opened the door, and here's this youth with one dog in one hand and the other in the other, and there's blood coming down his hand. And of course I got a towel real quick to wrap it, and we have a clinic on campus. I'll tell you, I never prayed so hard that that kid didn't get a severed nerve in his hand. Luckily he was okay, but it was a close call, and it taught me always have 2 youth in the yard. The last thing we check when we leave for the day is all kennels are latched. And we also do dog bite prevention before any new youth in the program gets a dog. So some of it I've learned the hard way, and when someone comes along and says, oh, I'm going to start a Project Pooch program, we say, well, you don't just take a bunch of dogs into a correctional facility. You have to screen the dogs, you have to screen the youth. And then the third one that we've been discovering in the last year, the staff. Do you know that book, It's Not the Dogs, It's the People? We use that a lot when we're trying to work with people on how to continue training with our dogs. Well, we have a lot of staff who love dogs. And when you're in a correctional setting, staff get the idea that no youth who's incarcerated is going to tell them what to do. So we have this cattle dog. And this cattle dog is on his leash. We always keep the dogs on leash when we walk around campus. And this brand new employee who happened to be a nurse at the facility, she goes over to pet the dog, and the youth says to her, don't stare at the dog's eyes. Well, guess what she does? She's not going to listen to this youth, and the dog jumps up, and he hits her chin, doesn't bite her, there's no bite, but jumped up, and she covers her mouth and says, oh, I've got bad teeth. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, I'm going to get a dental bill here, but not for a dog, for a person. And she actually goes to the doctor. Well, whenever we have a dog bite, we have to send the youth to the clinic on the campus, and that's reported to the superintendent. And in her case, because she also went out to a doctor, that's reported because the incident happened at her work site. Luckily, with this new superintendent, the one that you saw on the video, he was absolutely awesome in supporting the program. Then we had an interim, and now we have another permanent. And he said that he was going to tell staff that you should not be walking up to the dogs. Plus, you shouldn't be leaving your work site to go visit the dogs, because you get people who love dogs, and they kind of decide to leave the workplace, and they come over to see the dogs. So we dodged that bullet, so to speak. But we're always walking on eggshells because you have people who don't like dogs. You have people who just don't want dogs there because they don't want the responsibility. So you always have to do a little bit of give and take when you have a program such as this in a correctional setting. But as the video mentioned, and sometimes people get these statistics mixed up. And as Dr. Beaver said, you can always make the data show whatever you want. So I really want to make it clear that we needed data. Whenever I would go to a conference and suggest that dogs could be a good adjunct therapy for some incarcerated youth, they'd say, where's your data? Where's your research? But I had these nice, warm, fuzzy stories. And I just kept saying, we don't have money to hire a researcher. A TV station out of California came to do a story on Project Pooch. It was called Save Our Streets. They showed it in California, and this woman who was at Pepperdine University had a golden retriever, loved dogs, trying to figure out what her doctoral research was going to be about, called me. And she said, I would like my doctoral thesis research to be around Project Pooch. So it didn't cost us anything for the research. But what we need to make clear is the research that she did was of youth in the program from 1993 to 1999. And at that time, we only had 100 youth having gone through the program. Now we've had over 300. Of those 100, when the follow-up was done, none had returned to the correctional setting. And they were easy to track because boys tend not to change their last names. So what we're doing now is we're doing just a data review of all the youth, over 300 who've been in the program, to see what our statistics look like. I think the other thing that's going to have to play into that, in Oregon, you know, in, 1998, we passed Measure 11, which meant for certain crimes, juveniles would be locked up until their 25th birthday, whereas prior, it was for certain crimes they were out at 21. They were no longer in the juvenile system. So now we have a youth in Project Pooch. He's been in there for 4 years. And people come to adopt dogs from us, and they think he's staff. You know, he is so good at, you know, working with the dogs and working with the other youth. So then that's something else we're going to have to consider, because when I first started the program, we had younger youth, like 16, 17, 18, and now the youngest youth in the program is 20. And some of them will age out of the juvenile system, and they'll still have to do some time in the adult system. So I think, you know, that's something we're going to have to look at as well. Now, in December, I went to Korea, and the youth said, north or south? Well, it was south, to set up a dog program in their correctional facility. And it was all sponsored by Samsung, so they didn't have to deal with the government in the sense that we do for funding. I think it was someone earlier mentioned the importance of being proactive as a lobbyist. Well, luckily we have a board member who is a lobbyist, and we get a lot of help in that arena. But in Korea, Samsung actually built the kennel in 30 days, and they deal a lot with smaller dogs. But they don't do any treatment. You know, they just lock them up, and then after their time's up, they go back into society. Whereas at our youth facility with Project Pooch, they have to do violent offender treatment, they have to do drug and alcohol treatment, sex offender treatment. So there's also, we're getting into a lot of cognitive behavior therapy as well. So I think there's a lot of things that really play into it, and my point is I think it's important when we're looking at data to look at the population, if we could follow up on these original 100 now and see, did they still stay out of the correctional facility. But the one thing that saved us from having our program cut was Oregon is looking at evidence-proven programs. So we had the research. Had we not had research, when they looked at the evidence of what, they cut a lot of programs for kids, such as woodworking and different things that they had available for youth that were in a severe, intensive environment, and they cut a lot of those out because they had no research to back why they were doing those programs. So the next piece of research that I'm working on is a social worker from Portland State University is looking at whether or not the Project Pooch youth, what they demonstrate when they're actually working with the dogs 7 days a week, does that positive behavior carry over into their living units and how they deal with their peers? And that's tough because it's not an individual cells like the adult system, so they can't go off and be by themselves. They're always with a group of 25, 26 other males, and sometimes your peers can be irritating if you have to live with them for 5 years in the same living unit. And then I also wanted to mention in closing, and then I'd like to allow for a few questions, is we do kind of a little homemade video for people with children who adopt dogs from us. And the youth actually shows the basic training that we do so they can show it over and over. Because unfortunately, a lot of people think because we train the dog, they don't have to do anything more. And we say, well, you know, it's a lot like a child, is you kind of have to keep reminding them of certain things they need to do and how they need to do it. So we now have free training for anyone who adopts a dog from us, and people are really taking to that. So we encourage the whole family to come back to the correctional facility. We do it every Saturday, and then they can keep up on the training, and that seems to really be working for us. We do take dogs back if for any reason the people have to give up the dog. It hasn't happened very often, but it has happened. We also run a boarding kennel atmosphere so that the youth have time cards, they have to check in, they have to check out. We're trying to teach them some employment skills. And we have volunteers from the public who come and do practice interviewing so that when they go out and apply for a job, and how do you mention that you have a felony? And of course, there are a lot of jobs that they'll never qualify for just because they did some really dumb things and were locked up, and now they have a record.